You are listening to HOA Violation Vault. Someone in this neighborhood has been running a quiet scam. A certified envelope sat on my doormat, and before I could even open it, Karen yelled from the driveway that my old file was reopened and the fees were due now. "I will make an example out of you," she shouted, waving a laminated policy sheet in the drizzle. Her name was Melissa Williams, Architectural Committee Chair for the Maplewood Commons Records Compliance Association in Buffalo, New York, and she was already dialing someone on her phone while pointing at my truck. The envelope had a red-stamped final notice on the front, no return address details I could read, just that bright red ink that made my stomach drop. I work as a financial analyst, and I track every HOA fee down to the penny, so when she said the portal showed me as unpaid, I knew something was wrong. The timestamp on my receipt was 3 weeks ago, but the portal claimed I never submitted it, and now she was standing there in her gray windbreaker with the hood up, a gray sun hat over that, clutching a bundle of zip ties like she was about to erect a sign stand right on my lawn. I opened the envelope while she kept shouting. Inside was a notice claiming that a violation from 2 years ago, one I thought was resolved, had been reopened. The fee was listed as $970, and there was a line at the bottom saying enforcement action would proceed immediately unless I paid in full by end of business today. I looked at my watch. It was 3 in the afternoon, and the management office closed at 5. That gave me 2 hours, and I already knew this was going to be a nightmare. Melissa stepped closer, her red shoulder-length hair plastered to her face from the drizzle, and she said, "I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it." She was always dramatic. That was her signature move. Every confrontation came with a phone call, a printed notice, and that red-stamped envelope that showed up like clockwork after she decided you were her new target. I asked her what violation she was talking about. She said it was a landscaping issue from 2023, something about my hedge height. I had trimmed the hedge back then, submitted photos, and the case was marked closed in the portal. I even had the email confirmation saved. But she held up a printout and said the record showed it was never properly resolved, and now the case was being enforced as part of a compliance sweep. She said the word sweep like it was a military operation. I asked to see the original complaint. She said the records were lost, but the fee structure was still valid. I asked how a fee could be valid if the complaint was lost. She said that was not her problem, and she walked back to her car, got in, and drove off, leaving me standing there with the envelope and a 2-hour deadline. I went inside and pulled up my old files. I had everything: the original violation notice, my response with photos, the confirmation email from the management company, and a screenshot of the portal showing the case is closed. The dates matched. The case was marked resolved on June 14, 2023. But when I logged into the portal now, the status had changed. It showed as unresolved, and the timestamp for the status update was backdated to June 10, 2023, 4 days before I submitted my response. That was impossible. I took a screenshot of both versions and saved them in a folder. Something was wrong, and it was not a software glitch. Someone had gone into the system and changed the record. I called the management office. The receptionist, a woman named Linda, answered after 6 rings. I explained the situation. She put me on hold for 5 minutes, then came back and said the case was flagged for enforcement, and I needed to submit a formal dispute packet in person before 5. I asked why it could not be done over email. She said email disputes were not accepted for reopened cases. I asked who reopened the case. She said she did not have that information. I asked to speak to the manager. She said the manager was off-site and would not be back until tomorrow. I said I would come in person, and she said that was fine, but I had to bring the full packet, proof of payment, proof of compliance, and a signed dispute form. I asked where I could get the form. She said it was on the portal. I logged in. The form was not there. I called back. She said she would email it to me. 20 minutes later, it arrived. I printed it, filled it out, and gathered every document I had. By the time I finished, it was 4. I had 1 hour. I grabbed my folder, got in my truck, and drove to the management office. The office was in a strip mall 10 minutes away, tucked between a dry cleaner and a tax prep place. I parked and walked in. Linda was at the front desk. I handed her the packet. She flipped through it, then said it was incomplete. I asked what was missing. She said I needed a signed statement from the original inspector confirming compliance. I said no one told me that. She said it was in the policy handbook. I asked to see the handbook. She said it was online. I pulled it up on my phone. The section she cited did not exist. I showed her. She said the handbook had been updated and I was looking at the old version. I asked for the new version. She said it was not posted yet, but the policy was still enforceable. I asked to speak to someone else. She said everyone else was in a meeting. I asked when the meeting would end. She said she did not know. I said I would wait. She said I could not wait in the office. I asked where I could wait. She said outside. I went outside and stood under the eave. The drizzle picked up. I texted my real estate agent, a guy named Marcus, who had sold me the house and warned me about the HOA culture here. He called me back in 2 minutes. I explained the situation. He said it sounded like selective enforcement and told me to get everything in writing. He said if they denied my dispute packet, they had to give me a reason, and that reason would be evidence if this ever went to court. He also said liens and disclosures would destroy my ability to sell or refinance, so I needed to stop this before it got to that level. At 4:40, a regional supervisor came out of the back office. Her name was Janet, and she wore a blazer and carried a tablet. I introduced myself and handed her the packet. She scanned it, then said the same thing Linda said. I needed a statement from the original inspector. I said the original inspector was never identified in the notice, so how could I get a statement from someone I could not contact? She said that was my responsibility. I said that was circular logic. She said the policy was clear. I said the policy did not exist in the version I could access. She said the updated handbook would be posted soon. I asked when. She said within 30 days. I said my deadline was today. She said that was correct. I asked if there was any way to extend the deadline while I obtained the statement. She said no. I asked what would happen if I did not pay. She said the case would proceed to enforcement, which could include towing, liens, or legal action. That was when Melissa pulled into the parking lot. She got out of her car, walked straight up to us, and said she was there to make sure the enforcement was handled properly. Janet looked annoyed, but did not tell her to leave. Melissa said, "We can tow first and explain later. That is how enforcement works." I stared at her. That line was going to come back to haunt her, but she did not know it yet. I asked Janet if Melissa had any authority in this process. Janet said Melissa was the architectural committee chair and had requested the reopening. I asked if that was standard. Janet said committee chairs could flag cases for review. I asked if there was a log of those requests. Janet said yes. I asked to see it. She said that was internal. I said I was requesting it under the records policy. She said I had to submit a formal records request in writing. I said fine, I would do that. Melissa laughed and said good luck with that. I left the office at 5. The tow truck followed me home. It parked across the street, engine running, yellow lights flashing. The driver, a guy in his 40s wearing a reflective vest, got out and stood by his truck, arms crossed. I parked in my driveway and walked over. I asked if he was planning to tow my vehicle. He said he had an authorization slip and was waiting for the signal. I asked to see the slip. He showed me a printout with no readable details, just a case number and my address. I asked who gave him the authorization. He said the HOA management company. I asked if he verified the claim. He said he did not verify anything, he just followed the paperwork. I told him my dispute was still pending. He said he did not care about disputes. I asked if he was aware that towing without proper notice was illegal. He said he had a notice right there. I said the notice was based on a case that was improperly reopened. He said that was between me and the HOA. I asked his name. He gave it. I wrote it down. He got back in his truck and waited. Melissa pulled up 10 minutes later. She got out, walked over to the tow driver, and they talked for a minute. Then she walked to my door and knocked. I opened it. She said, "I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it." She pulled out her phone and made a show of dialing. I said nothing. She said the tow was happening tonight unless I paid. I said the tow was illegal. She said the authorization was valid. I said the case was never properly reopened. She said the records showed otherwise. I said the records were altered. She stopped. She looked at me. She said I was making a serious accusation. I said I had proof. She said proof of what? I said proof that the portal timestamps were backdated. She said that was impossible. I said I had screenshots. She said screenshots could be faked. I said I had metadata. She did not respond to that. She turned and walked back to her car. The tow driver got back in his truck and drove off. I went inside and exported every document I had, including the portal audit log I had downloaded earlier that day. The log showed 2 entries for my case, one marking it closed on June 14, 2023, and another marking it unresolved on June 10, 2023. But the creation timestamp for the second entry was March 2025. Someone had gone back into the system 2 years later and inserted a backdated record. I submitted my formal records request that night. I asked for the full file on my 2023 case, the log of all committee requests for reopenings, and the policy handbook version that Janet referenced. I sent it via certified mail and email. The next morning, I got a reply from Linda saying my request was received and would be processed within 30 days. I replied saying the enforcement deadline was immediate, so I needed the records immediately. She did not reply. I called. She said the timeline was set by policy. I asked which policy. She said the records retention policy. I asked to see it. She said it was in the handbook. I said the handbook was not posted. She said that was not her problem. I asked to escalate. She said I could file a complaint with the board. I asked how. She said the complaint form was on the portal. I logged in. The form was not there. I called back. She hung up on me. That afternoon, Melissa sent me a new notice. It arrived via email and certified mail simultaneously. The notice said my truck was in violation of the parking policy and would be towed within 24 hours unless I moved it to a compliant location. I walked outside. My truck was in my driveway, exactly where it had been for 2 years. I checked the parking policy. It said vehicles must be parked in driveways or garages. My truck was in my driveway. I took photos. I called Linda. She said the policy had been updated and driveways were no longer compliant for trucks over a certain weight. I said my truck was a standard half-ton pickup. She said the threshold was now 7,000 pounds. I said my truck was 6,200 pounds. She said I had to prove it. I said the registration listed the weight. She said I had to provide a certified weight slip from a scale. I asked where I could get that. She said that was my responsibility. I asked how long I had. She said 24 hours. I drove to a truck scale 15 miles away. I paid $20 for a certified weight slip. The slip showed 6,200 pounds. I scanned it and emailed it to Linda. She replied saying the slip had to be submitted in person. I said that was not mentioned in the notice. She said it was policy. I asked which policy. She said the updated enforcement procedures. I asked to see them. She said they were not public. I said that was absurd. She did not reply. I drove back to the office. Linda was not at the desk. I waited. A different woman came out. I handed her the slip. She said she would file it. I asked for a receipt. She said receipts were not provided for compliance documents. I said I needed proof of submission. She said I could take a photo of her holding the slip. I took a photo. I left. The next morning, I got another notice. This one said my weight slip was not valid because it was not dated within 72 hours of the violation notice. I checked the date on the slip. It was dated the day I received the notice. I called Linda. She said the 72-hour window started from the date the violation was observed, not the date the notice was sent. I asked when the violation was observed. She said 3 days before the notice. I said that was impossible because the policy did not exist 3 days before the notice. She said the policy was adopted at the last board meeting. I asked for the minutes. She said the minutes were not posted yet. I asked when they would be posted. She said within 60 days. I said I needed them now. She said that was not possible. I hung up. I called Marcus. He said I needed to attend the next board meeting and force the issue publicly. He said boards hated public confrontations and often caved when pressed in front of an audience. The next meeting was in 2 days. I marked it on my calendar. In the meantime, I kept building my file. I pulled every email, every notice, every screenshot, every receipt. I organized them chronologically in a binder. I printed 2 copies, one for me, one for the board. I highlighted every inconsistency, every moving goalpost, every timestamp that did not match. The pattern was clear. Melissa had reopened my case, altered the records, and was now piling on new violations to force me to pay. But why? I did not know yet, but I was going to find out. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA revenge content. The night before the meeting, I got a call from a neighbor named Alan. He lived 3 doors down and had been dealing with his own HOA nightmare. He said Melissa had targeted him last year over a fence height issue, and when he fought it, she reopened an old drainage complaint from 2019 and hit him with a $1,500 fine. He paid it because he did not want the hassle, but he regretted it. He said he had copies of his notices and records requests, and he was willing to share them if it helped my case. I said yes. He came over an hour later with a folder. Inside were notices, emails, and records request denials that looked identical to mine. Same language, same formatting, same red-stamped envelopes. He also had a screenshot of the HOA group chat where Melissa and 2 other board members coordinated a targeted enforcement wave against homeowners they considered troublemakers. Alan was on the list. So was I. The chat log showed them joking about reopening old cases and called it spring cleaning. I asked Alan if he was willing to testify at the meeting. He said no, he did not want more trouble, but I could use his documents. I thanked him and added them to my binder. The meeting was held in the community center, a squat brick building at the edge of the neighborhood. I arrived early. The room was set up with rows of folding chairs facing a table where the board sat. Melissa was already there, sitting at the far end, shuffling papers. The board president, a man in his 60s named Ron, sat in the middle. There were 3 other board members, all looking bored. About 15 residents were scattered in the chairs. I sat in the front row. Melissa looked up, saw me, and smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who thought they had already won. Ron opened the meeting with the usual announcements. Then he moved to new business. I raised my hand. He called on me. I stood and said I wanted to address the reopening of my 2023 case and the pattern of selective enforcement I had documented. Ron said I could have 3 minutes. Melissa interrupted and said the case was an administrative matter and not appropriate for public comment. Ron said public comment was allowed under the rules. Melissa said the rules had been updated. Ron looked confused. He asked when. Melissa said at the last meeting. Ron shuffled through his papers and said he did not see that in the minutes. Melissa said the minutes were not finalized yet. Ron said we would proceed with public comment. I opened my binder. I started with the timeline. I explained the original 2023 case, the resolution, the email confirmation, and the backdated portal entry. I showed the screenshots. Melissa said the screenshots were not reliable. I said I also had the portal audit log showing the creation timestamp. She said the log was internal and I should not have access to it. I said I downloaded it from the portal. She said that was a violation of the privacy policy. I said the policy allowed residents to access their own records. She said the log was not a resident record. Ron interrupted and asked to see the log. I handed him a copy. He studied it for a minute. He said it looked like the record was altered. Melissa said that was a serious accusation. Ron said it was a serious log. Melissa said the log could have been tampered with. I said the metadata was embedded in the file. Ron asked if anyone on the board had access to alter portal records. Melissa said only the management company had that access. I said then the management company altered the record at someone's request. Ron asked who would make that request. I said the committee chair who flagged the case. Melissa went quiet. I moved to the next point. I explained the parking violation, the moving goalpost on the wait slip, and the retroactive policy changes. I showed the notices side by side. The first notice said 72 hours from the notice date. The second notice said 72 hours from the observation date. Ron said that was inconsistent. Melissa said the language was clarified in the second notice. I said clarification was not the same as changing the rule after I complied. Ron agreed. Melissa said I was wasting the board's time. I said I had one more thing. I pulled out Alan's documents. I explained that a neighbor had provided me with his enforcement records, and the pattern was identical. I showed the notices, the red stamped envelopes, and the group chat log. Melissa stood up. She said the group chat was private. I said it was shared with the board, so it was association business. Ron asked to see it. I handed him a copy. He read it. His face changed. He looked at Melissa. He said, "Is this real?" She said it was taken out of context. He said the context was pretty clear. She said I had no right to those records. I said Alan gave them to me voluntarily. Ron said the meeting was over for now, and the board would discuss this in executive session. The meeting broke up. Melissa stormed out. I stayed and talked to a few residents who thanked me for speaking up. One of them, a woman named Claire, said Melissa had targeted her last month over a mailbox color, and she was about to give up and repaint it. I told her to wait. I said if this pattern held, Melissa was done. Claire said she hoped so. I left and drove home. I was exhausted but satisfied. I had put the board on notice, and Ron looked genuinely concerned. That was a good sign. The next day, I got an email from Linda saying my records request was denied. The reason given was that the requested documents contained privileged board communications and were exempt under the policy. I replied asking which policy. She did not respond. I submitted a second records request, this time narrowing it to just the case file and the adoption records for the updated parking policy. 2 days later, Linda replied saying the case file was lost and the parking policy was still being drafted, so there were no adoption records. I called her. She did not answer. I called the main office number. A different person answered. I asked to speak to Janet. She said Janet was on leave. I asked when she would return. She said she did not know. I asked to speak to someone else. She said everyone else was busy. I said I would hold. She put me on hold for 15 minutes, then disconnected the call. I called Marcus. He said the pattern was clear. The management company was protecting Melissa, and the only way to break through was to escalate outside the HOA system. He said I should file a complaint with the County Housing Compliance Office and consider hiring an attorney. He also said there was another option, request a management audit. He said audits were rare, but if enough residents complained, the board could be forced to hire an independent auditor to review the enforcement records, financial transactions, and policy adoptions. He said audits exposed patterns, and patterns were hard to deny. I asked how many residents I needed. He said at least 10 signatures on a petition. I said I would start collecting them. I printed a petition form and went door to door. Most people were sympathetic but afraid. They did not want to get on Melissa's radar. A few refused outright, but some signed. Claire signed. Alan signed. A retired teacher named Donna signed. A couple who had been fined for a holiday decoration signed. By the end of the week, I had 12 signatures. I submitted the petition to the board via certified mail and email. The email bounced. I called Linda. She said the board email was down. I asked for an alternate contact. She said there was none. I said I would hand deliver it. She said the office did not accept hand deliveries for board matters. I said that was absurd. She hung up. I met Marcus at the mailbox cluster 2 days later. He handed me a folded piece of paper. He said it was a missing page from the board minutes, the page where the updated parking policy was supposed to be adopted. He said a friend of his on the landscaping crew found it in the trash outside the community center after a meeting. The page was blank except for a header that said parking policy revision and a line at the bottom that said vote pending. There was no policy text, no vote count, no signatures. Marcus said the policy was never adopted. It was a ghost rule. Melissa had enforced it anyway. I added the page to my binder. A few neighbors were standing nearby watching. One of them asked what was going on. I explained briefly. She said Melissa had fined her for a porch light that was allegedly too bright, but the rule Melissa cited did not exist in the handbook. I asked if she had documentation. She said yes. I told her to send it to me. She did, that night. The pattern was now undeniable. Melissa was inventing rules, altering records, and coordinating with the management company to enforce non-existent policies. But I still did not know why. What was the endgame? I had a theory. She was building a compliance revenue stream. Every fine, every reopened case, every moving goalpost generated fees. The fees went to the HOA account, but Melissa controlled the budget as committee chair. If she was skimming, the audit would catch it. If she was not skimming, she was still abusing power, and the audit would prove that too. Either way, I needed the audit to happen. The board responded to my petition a week later. The response was a single sentence. The board has reviewed your petition and determined that an audit is not warranted at this time. No explanation, no reasoning, no vote count. I replied asking for the criteria used to determine that an audit was not warranted. Linda replied saying criteria were internal. I asked to see the board's decision in the minutes. She said the decision was made in executive session and would not be included in the public minutes. I said executive sessions were for legal matters, personnel matters, and contract negotiations. She said enforcement matters were included. I said enforcement matters were not listed in the executive session policy. She said the policy had been updated. I asked to see the update. She said it was not posted yet. I was done with the management company. I filed a complaint with the County Housing Compliance Office, alleging selective enforcement, record alteration, and procedural violations. The Compliance Office acknowledged my complaint and said they would investigate within 60 days. That was too long. I needed something faster. I called an attorney, a guy named Eric who specialized in HOA disputes. He reviewed my binder over a video call. He said I had a strong case for an injunction and possible damages, but litigation was slow and expensive. He said the better play was to force a special meeting. He said the HOA bylaws allowed residents to call a special meeting if 20% of homeowners signed a petition. He said the neighborhood had about 200 homes, so I needed 40 signatures. I said I only had 12. He said get more. I went back out. This time, I brought my binder and showed people the evidence. The response was different. People were angry. They had their own stories. A man named Greg said Melissa had threatened to report him to code enforcement over a shed, but the shed was legal and permitted. A woman named Sandy said Melissa had blocked her guest parking pass request for 3 months with no explanation. A couple named Tom and Lisa said Melissa had fined them twice for the same violation and refused to credit the duplicate payment. I collected signatures. By the end of 2 weeks, I had 43. I submitted the special meeting petition. This time I hand-delivered it to Ron at his house. He answered the door in a bathrobe. I said I needed him to acknowledge receipt. He looked at the petition. He said he would bring it to the board. I said the bylaws required the board to schedule the meeting within 30 days. He said he knew the bylaws. I said I wanted it in writing. He said fine. He wrote a note on a pad, tore it off, and handed it to me. The note said petition received, will schedule per bylaws. I thanked him and left. The special meeting was scheduled for 3 weeks later. The agenda was posted on the portal, resident concerns regarding enforcement practices and management oversight. Melissa sent an email to the board list the day after the agenda was posted. Someone forwarded it to me. The email said the meeting was a waste of time and that I was a troublemaker trying to undermine the board's authority. She said the board should not allow me to speak. Ron replied saying the bylaws required public comment at special meetings. Melissa replied saying the bylaws could be waived. Ron replied saying no, they could not. Melissa did not reply after that. The week before the meeting, I got another notice. This one was different. It was not about my truck or my hedge or my parking. It was about my home-based business license. The notice said the HOA had received a complaint that I was operating a business in violation of the residential use policy. The notice demanded that I cease operations immediately and submit proof of compliance within 7 days. If I did not comply, the notice said, the HOA would report me to the city and request that my business license be revoked. I stared at the notice. My business license was for financial consulting. I worked from a home office. I had no clients visiting the property, no signage, no inventory, no employees. The license was fully compliant with both city and HOA rules. But the notice did not cite a specific rule. It just said residential use policy. I checked the handbook. There was no policy prohibiting home offices. I called Linda. She said the policy was implied. I said implied policies were not enforceable. She said the board interpreted the rules. I said interpretations had to be documented. She said they were. I asked where. She said in the board's records. I asked to see the records. She said I had to submit a request. I said I already submitted 2 requests and both were denied. She hung up. I called Eric. He said the timing was not a coincidence. He said Melissa was trying to intimidate me before the meeting. He said the business license threat was serious because it targeted my livelihood, but it was also sloppy. He said if Melissa reported me to the city would ask for proof of a violation, and Melissa did not have any. He said I should document everything and bring it to the meeting. He also said I should file a harassment complaint with the board. I said the board was the problem. He said file it anyway, because it created a record. I filed the harassment complaint via certified mail. The complaint outlined every notice, every moving goalpost, every denied request, and every threat. I included a timeline and 50 pages of exhibits. I sent copies to every board member, the management company, and the HOA attorney. The attorney replied 2 days later. His email was short. I have reviewed your complaint and advised the board to cease enforcement actions against you pending a full review of the case file. Do not take further action until the review is complete. I forwarded the email to Eric. He said it was a good sign. He said the attorney saw the liability and was trying to cover the board. He said I should bring the email to the meeting as evidence that the attorney warned them to stop. Melissa did not stop. The day before the meeting, she sent another notice. This one said my truck was parked illegally again and would be towed within 24 hours. I took a photo of my truck. It was in the same spot it had been for weeks. I replied to the notice with the photo and the attorney's email. Melissa replied saying the attorney's email did not apply to new violations. I replied saying this was not a new violation. It was the same truck in the same spot. She did not reply. The tow truck showed up that night. The same driver from before. I went outside. He was standing by his truck, holding the authorization slip. I asked if he was really going to tow my truck after everything that had happened. He said he was just doing his job. I said his job was about to get him named in a lawsuit. He stopped. He said he did not want trouble. I said then he should call whoever gave him the authorization and tell them the situation. He made a call. He talked for a minute, then hung up. He said the authorization was pulled. He got in his truck and left. The special meeting started at 7. The room was packed. Every chair was full, and people were standing along the walls. Ron opened the meeting and said the purpose was to address resident concerns about enforcement practices. He said the board had reviewed the complaints and was prepared to discuss them. Melissa interrupted. She said the meeting was improperly called and should be adjourned. Ron said the petition met the bylaw requirements. Melissa said the signatures were not verified. Ron said the board verified them. Melissa said the board did not have authority to verify signatures without a committee review. Ron said there was no such committee. Melissa said there should be. Ron said that was not on the agenda. Melissa said she was making a motion to adjourn. No one seconded. The meeting continued. I was called to speak first. I stood and opened my binder. I started with the cold case, my 2023 hedge violation, the backdated portal entry, the altered records. I showed the 2 versions of the minutes and asked which one was real. Ron said he did not know. I handed him both copies. He studied them. One version showed the parking policy adopted. The other showed it pending. The pending version had a date stamp 3 days earlier than the adopted version. Ron said the earlier version was the official record. I said then the parking policy was never adopted. Ron looked at Melissa. She said the policy was adopted verbally. Ron said verbal adoptions were not valid. Melissa said they were if the board agreed. Ron said there was no record of agreement. Melissa said the record was lost. I said the record was not lost. It was never created, because the policy was never adopted. Ron said he was inclined to agree. Melissa stood up. She said I was lying. She said the policy was real and I was trying to discredit the board. I said I was not discrediting anyone, I was just reading the minutes. She said the minutes were incomplete. I said then why were they posted as official? She said they were drafts. I said the word draft did not appear anywhere on the document. Ron said Melissa needed to sit down. She did not sit. She said I was harassing the board and should be removed from the meeting. I said I had the floor. Ron agreed. Melissa said she was calling management. She pulled out her phone. Ron said this was not a management issue. Melissa said, I am calling management and I am going to be dramatic about it. She dialed. A few residents laughed. Ron told her to put the phone away or leave the room. She put the phone away. She sat down. I continued. I explained the group chat log, the targeted enforcement wave, the reopened cases. I showed the screenshots. Ron asked to see them. I handed him copies. He passed them to the other board members. They read in silence. One of them, a woman named Carol, said she did not know about the group chat. Melissa said it was private. Carol said it was board business. Melissa said it was informal. Carol said informal or not, it was a problem. Ron asked if anyone else on the board knew about the group chat. No one answered. Ron said he wanted the full log sent to the board attorney for review. Melissa said that was not necessary. Ron said it was absolutely necessary. I moved to the business license threat. I explained the notice, the lack of a cited rule, and the timing. I said it was retaliation for filing the petition. I pulled out the email from the HOA attorney. I said the attorney had warned the board to stop enforcement actions against me, and Melissa had ignored the warning. I handed Ron a copy of the email. Ron read it. He looked at Melissa. He said, "Did you see this email?" She said yes. He said, "And you sent another notice anyway." She said the email did not apply to new violations. Ron said there was no new violation. Melissa said my truck was parked illegally. Ron said the parking policy was never adopted. Melissa said it was adopted verbally. Ron said we just covered this. Melissa said she stood by her enforcement. Ron said the board did not. Carol moved to rescind all enforcement actions against me pending a full audit. Another board member seconded. The motion passed 4-1. Melissa voted no. The meeting was not over. Claire stood and said she wanted to speak. Ron recognized her. Claire said Melissa had targeted her over a mailbox color, and when she asked to see the rule, Melissa said it was in the handbook. Claire said she checked the handbook and the rule was not there. Melissa said the rule was in the architectural guidelines. Claire said she asked for the guidelines, and Melissa said they were not public. Claire said that was convenient. Melissa said the guidelines were internal committee documents. Claire said then, how was she supposed to comply? Melissa said she should have asked before painting the mailbox. Claire said she did ask, and Melissa approved it in writing. Claire held up a printed email. Melissa went pale. Claire read the email aloud. It was from Melissa, dated 6 months ago, saying the mailbox color was fine. Melissa said she did not remember sending that email. Claire said the email had Melissa's name and signature. Melissa said someone must have sent it from her account. Claire said that sounded like a problem Melissa should take up with IT. The room erupted in laughter. Ron called for order. He said the board would take Claire's complaint seriously and review the email. He asked Claire to submit a copy. She said she already had. Melissa said the email was forged. Claire said she had the metadata. Melissa said nothing. Ron said the board would investigate. Melissa said there was nothing to investigate. Ron said the board disagreed. Another resident stood and said she had a similar story. Then another. Then another. By the time the public comment period ended, 7 residents had shared stories of selective enforcement, moving goalposts, and denied records requests. Every story had the same pattern. Every story pointed to Melissa. Ron said the board would take all complaints seriously and conduct a full review of enforcement practices. He said the board would also request a management audit to review the financial transactions, policy adoptions, and committee actions over the past 3 years. Melissa said an audit was not necessary. Ron said the board had already decided. Melissa said she was resigning. Ron said that was her choice. Melissa stood, grabbed her papers, and walked toward the door. Halfway there, a gust of wind from an open side door caught her printed packet. The pages went airborne, scattering across the room. Residents scrambled to pick them up. One of them, Greg, handed the pages back to Melissa with a grin. He said, "Looks like you lost your records." Melissa snatched the pages and stormed out. The room broke into applause. The audit was completed 6 weeks later. The auditor found multiple issues, unauthorized policy adoptions, missing committee meeting minutes, selective enforcement patterns, and financial discrepancies in the compliance fee account. The discrepancies totaled over $12,000. The auditor recommended that the board refer the matter to law enforcement. The board did. Melissa was questioned by a county investigator. She denied everything. The investigator reviewed the group chat log, the altered portal records, and the missing minutes. 2 weeks later, Melissa was charged with misuse of association funds and falsifying records. The charges were misdemeanors, but they were public, and Melissa resigned from the board the day after the charges were filed. The board also fired the management company. Ron said the company had enabled Melissa by altering records, denying legitimate requests, and ignoring the attorney's warnings. The board hired a new management company, and within a month, the enforcement backlog was cleared, the records were updated, and the policies were posted in full. My case was officially closed with no fees owed. The HOA also issued a written order barring Melissa from contacting me directly. If she had a complaint, it had to go through the new management company and the board. I got a call from Eric a few weeks later. He said Melissa was facing a civil lawsuit from 3 other residents who had been targeted by her enforcement scheme. He said the lawsuit alleged harassment, financial damages, and emotional distress. He asked if I wanted to join. I said no. I was done. I had my life back, and that was enough. Eric said he understood. He said he was proud of what I had accomplished. He said most people gave up when the HOA started moving goalposts, but I did not. And that made all the difference. The neighborhood changed after that. The new board was transparent. The new management company was responsive. The enforcement practices were fair. People stopped living in fear of red stamped envelopes and late-night tow trucks. The mailbox cluster became a place where neighbors talked again, instead of avoiding eye contact. Claire repainted her mailbox whatever color she wanted. Greg built another shed. Alan put up a fence. Life went on. I still see Melissa sometimes. She lives 4 streets over. She does not make eye contact. She does not wave. She keeps her head down and walks fast, like she is afraid someone might recognize her. I do not go out of my way to cross paths, but when I do see her, I feel nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no bitterness. Just indifference. She was a problem, and I solved it. That is all. The cold case taught me something important. Paper trails do not lie. People lie. Policies change. Memories fade. But timestamps, metadata, screenshots, and receipts, those stay. And when you have enough of them, stacked in the right order, with the right highlights and the right notes, they become something more than evidence. They become accountability. They become justice. They become proof that you do not have to roll over when someone waves a laminated policy sheet in your face and screams that they are in charge. You just have to stay calm, document everything, and wait for them to make the mistake. Because they always do. People who abuse power cannot help themselves. They get comfortable. They get sloppy. And when they do, you have them. The HOA retracts the enforcement action in writing. The management audit exposes the pattern, and Karen is ordered to stop contacting the narrator directly. Karen's printed packet goes airborne in a gust of wind at the worst possible moment, and the whole neighborhood sees her scramble to pick up the pages while people laugh. It is not revenge. It is just gravity, and it feels perfect. A year later, I ran into Ron at the grocery store. He thanked me for pushing the audit. He said the board was in a better place now, and the neighborhood was healthier. He said Melissa had tried to run for the board again, but no one would nominate her. He said she withdrew her candidacy the day before the deadline. I said I was glad to hear it. Ron said he was sorry for not acting sooner. He said he knew something was wrong, but he did not know how bad it was until I forced the issue. I said better late than never. He agreed. We shook hands and went our separate ways. Marcus called me a few months after that. He said he had a new client who was dealing with an HOA nightmare, and he wanted to know if I would be willing to talk to them. I said sure. The client was a woman named Beth, who lived in a neighborhood 10 miles away. Her HOA was threatening to foreclose on her house over a disputed assessment. She had documents, but she did not know how to organize them or what to do next. I met her at a coffee shop and walked her through the process: how to build a timeline, how to request records, how to spot inconsistencies, how to force accountability. She took notes the whole time. She thanked me and said she felt hopeful for the first time in months. I told her to stay calm, document everything, and do not let them move the goalposts. She said she would. 6 months later, Marcus told me Beth won her case. The HOA dropped the foreclosure, refunded the disputed fees, and replaced the board president. I was happy for her. It felt good to know the lessons I learned could help someone else. I still keep the binder. It sits on a shelf in my home office, right next to my business license. I do not open it often, but I know it is there. It is a reminder that systems only work when people hold them accountable, and accountability only happens when someone is willing to do the work. Most people are not willing. They pay the fine, move the truck, repaint the mailbox, and move on. I do not blame them. It is exhausting. It is time-consuming. It is risky. But sometimes the risk is worth it. Sometimes the exhaustion turns into determination. And sometimes determination turns into justice. The neighborhood is quiet now. The rules are clear. The enforcement is fair. The board meetings are boring, which is exactly how they should be. No drama, no red-stamped envelopes, no late-night tow trucks. Just a neighborhood where people live their lives without fear of arbitrary punishment. That is the way it should have been from the start. But it was not, and it took a fight to make it right. I am glad I fought. I am glad I did not give up. I am glad I kept the receipts. I see the tow driver sometimes too. He waves now. We do not talk, but there is no hostility. He was just doing his job, and he figured out pretty quickly that the job was dirty. I heard from Alan that the tow company dropped the HOA contract after the audit came out. They did not want to be associated with the liability. That was smart. Vendors who enable bad HOA boards end up in courtrooms eventually, and courtrooms are expensive. Alan moved last year. He said he loved the house but could not shake the stress of the HOA fight, even after Melissa was gone. I understood. Some battles leave scars. He sold the house and bought a place outside the city with no HOA, no covenants, and no committees. He sends me photos sometimes. His new yard is huge, and he is building a workshop. I am happy for him. Claire is still here. We talk at the mailbox cluster sometimes. She painted her mailbox bright yellow after the new board took over. She said it was her way of reclaiming the neighborhood. I told her it looked great. She laughed and said Melissa would have had a meltdown. I said Melissa was not our problem anymore. Claire said that was the best part. Donna, the retired teacher, started a neighborhood watch group after the audit. She said the HOA drama taught her that silence was dangerous, and the best way to prevent future problems was to stay informed and stay connected. The group meets once a month. I go sometimes. It is mostly social, but Donna always includes a short update on board actions, budget status, and policy changes. It is boring in the best way. No surprises, no ambushes, no hidden agendas, just transparency. The new management company is run by a woman named Patricia. She is professional, responsive, and straightforward. I submitted a records request to test her, and she had the documents to me within 3 days. No games, no fees, no runaround. That is how it should work. I told her I appreciated it. She said it was just her job. I said her job was a lot better than the last company's job. She smiled and said she had heard the stories. The HOA attorney, the one who sent the warning email, is still the attorney. Ron said the board kept him because he was the only one who tried to stop the train wreck. The attorney told Ron privately that he had warned Melissa multiple times to stop the selective enforcement, and she ignored him every time. He said he was relieved the audit happened because he was worried the board was going to get sued into oblivion. Ron said the board almost did. The attorney said almost only counts in horseshoes and hand grenades. I refinanced my house last year. The title company pulled the HOA records as part of the process. They found no liens, no violations, no flags. The underwriter said it was one of the cleanest HOA files she had seen. I did not tell her what it took to make it clean. I just said thanks and signed the papers. The refinance saved me $300 a month. That is $3,600 a year, over $100,000 over the life of the loan. Melissa's enforcement scheme almost cost me that, and a lot more. I think about that sometimes. I think about how close I came to just paying the fees and moving on. If I had done that, I would still be under her thumb, still getting red-stamped envelopes, still wondering when the next threat would arrive. I am glad I did not pay. I am glad I fought. The business license is still active. My home office is still compliant. I still work from home, and I still track every HOA fee down to the penny. Old habits die hard. But now, the tracking is easier, because the fees are predictable, and the rules are clear. No surprises, no backdated entries, no phantom violations. Just a boring, functional HOA that does what it is supposed to do. Maintain common areas, enforce consistent rules, and stay out of people's lives as much as possible. I got a letter from the county investigator 6 months ago. She said Melissa had pleaded guilty to the misuse of funds charge and was sentenced to probation, community service, and restitution. The restitution amount was $12,000, split among the affected homeowners. My share was $800. It showed up in my bank account 2 weeks later. I did not celebrate. I just moved it into savings. It was not about the money. It never was. It was about the principle. It was about accountability. It was about proving that power has limits, and those limits are enforced by people who are willing to do the work. The community center still hosts board meetings once a month. I go sometimes, but not often. The meetings are boring now, which is exactly how they should be. No drama, no shouting, no packets flying through the air, just agendas, motions, votes, and adjournments. Ron retired from the board last year. Carol took over as president. She is doing a good job. The neighborhood is stable, the budget is balanced, and the enforcement is fair. That is all anyone ever wanted. I still keep the flashlight clipped to my pocket. It is a habit now. I used it so many times during the fight, shining it on documents, checking mailbox deliveries, walking to my truck in the dark to photograph notices. It became part of my uniform. Claire noticed it once and asked if I was expecting another showdown. I said no, but I like being prepared. She said that made sense. She said I should write a guide for other homeowners dealing with HOA abuse. I said maybe someday. She said the world needed it. I said the world needed a lot of things, and most people were not going to read a guide. They were just going to pay the fine and hope it went away. She said that was sad but probably true. The red stamped envelopes stopped coming. That is the best part. My mailbox is boring now. Bills, ads, the occasional package. No threats, no notices, no certified mail requiring a signature. Just normal mail for a normal life. I did not realize how much stress those envelopes caused until they stopped. It was like a weight I did not know I was carrying suddenly lifted. I sleep better now. I do not check the portal every day. I do not flinch when I see a tow truck on the street. I just live my life, the way it should have been all along. The lesson I learned is simple. Do not let them move the goalposts. The moment you comply and they change the rule, you have to stop and call it out. If you do not, they will do it again and again until you are buried under impossible requirements and arbitrary punishments. The system only works if people hold it accountable. Accountability is not complicated. It is just documentation, persistence, and the willingness to stand up when everyone else is sitting down. Most people will not do it. They are tired, they are busy, they are scared. I understand that. But someone has to do it. Someone has to be the person who says no, this is not right, and I am going to prove it. That someone was me, and I am glad it was. The neighborhood is better now. The rules are clear, the enforcement is fair, and the board is functional. People feel safe in their homes. They do not live in fear of arbitrary punishment. They do not avoid the mailbox or check the portal every morning with dread. They just live. That is the goal. That is the victory. Not the money, not the apology, not the resignation, just the ability to live without fear. That is worth every hour I spent building that binder, every confrontation I endured, every moving goalpost I called out. It was worth it. Thank you for being here.